Good afternoon and welcome to TCAM Senior Wednesday. I'm Dr. Lana Reeves and we are live at the Kansas African American Museum down here in downtown Wichita. And we are sitting amidst Defining Black Wichita, Part 2, 1930s to 1970s, the heart of the community, the Dunbar and McAdams District. And of course, we have four distinguished panelists with us today, and they're going to discuss the stories behind the book, African Americans in Wichita, and which is a large part of this awesome exhibition that we have here today. And our curator, Ms. Paris Cunningham, is sitting over here at the end of the table. And she, of course, curated, this is her second curation from that book, like I said, part 2. And then we have these awesome people here who were a part of the book and have some awesome stories to tell from her mentor, Carol Branda, our former curator. I guess we call her our curator emeritus. And then we also have Dr. Jay Price from Wichita State University. And we also have Dr. Gretchen Ike, who is professor emerita of Friends University. Awesome to be here today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our curator, Paris Cunningham. I'm going to talk about Defining Black Wichita, Part 2.
Okay, so my mic might be kind of low, so I'm going to hold my lapel mic up. But I would just like to ask each of you to kind of go around and introduce yourselves a little bit. Dr. Reeves kind of explained who you are, but give us a little information about what you're doing today and also what your role was in the creation of the African American of Wichita book.
I'm going to start with Jay, as it was his idea.
Well, actually, let's just start.
Okay.
That's better.
I'm Gretchen Ike. I teach half a year in Bosnia, at a Muslim university in Bosnia, and I'm a writer, and they suggested I bring some of my books so that you see them here. We started 5 years ago with this project. It was Jay Price's idea to maybe do a history and cultural book on African Americans in Wichita through Arcadia Press, which is a press that does picture books. They're not children's picture books, adult picture books, and is a way to preserve a lot of the photographs of a particular historical time. And we had a team of 6 people, which was actually a wonderful team. We were mixed ethnically. We were mixed in terms of our roles. We had 2 grad students, one from WSU and one from, well, actually both from WSU, but one with a Friends background, who served on the team as well. And then Dr. Robert Weems and Jay and I and Carol and Mark McCormick. And if you don't know Mark McCormick, he was the former director here, and his book is the book that was chosen by Wichita State for the campus read this year, which is on sale here in the bookstore as well as Amazon and other places. So with that, pass it to Jay, our fearless leader.
Well, you're very kind, Gretchen, but actually to give credit where credit is due, it's Mark McCormick who started the project. He was the one who approached me about how do we tell the story of the African American community. So get used to me.
Jay, I think you have to talk into the mic a little more.
Sorry, my bad. I'm also getting used to a new mask from KMUW, so my apologies. Mark wanted me to work with him on creating a photo history. I'd done a couple of photo histories about Wichita before, including the Wichita Lebanese community. And so we wanted to use that as a model for how do we talk about a community. And immediately we decided that we needed to really bring a team together. And with his insight with the community, that was important. I was happy to help guide the project, but I also have to realize right from the outset that I'm coming in as an outsider to the community, that not being from Wichita, being from Santa Fe, New Mexico, that shapes how I look at things. Coming into the awareness that as someone who is white, with all of the blindness that white privilege provides, I had to sit and listen to what other stories are being told and really help facilitate this. And so it was wonderful to be able to work with Dr. Weems, with Mark, with some really fantastic and enthusiastic students, and of course with Gretchen, whose insight is absolutely phenomenal. And Carol, Branda, you need to have these types of resources, and resources are people as well as photos. We couldn't have done the book without you. We really couldn't. And so you need to talk to so-and-so. You need to look at so-and-so. And that is essential, because coming in from the outside, we know what we mean, but maybe there's some hidden stories out there. So I was thrilled to be able to work with such a great team. Today, I remain with the local and community history program at Wichita State University. My research recently is shifting a little more to the Latino community and the North End community. So rather than a book to promote, I'd like to promote a website, somos, somos.wichita.edu. For the Somos to Wichita, We Are Wichita website. So take a look for that. It's a bilingual website about the Latino community here in Wichita.
And my name is Carol Branda, and my claim to fame is only that I worked here for quite a number of years as curator. And I had the joy of working with this panel, and because I was familiar with the archives, I was able to be somewhat of help finding photographs and sort of my years of experience here. I came in as an outsider. I was not part of the Black community, but during my time as curator, I learned quite a bit. I met quite a few people. It was really a wonderful experience for me. I learned so much. And that's what's so wonderful about this book, is that it fills a gap that we really need to have about the history of African Americans in Wichita and Kansas. Right now I'm retired. I'm back in my studio. I'm a studio artist, so I'm just helping and doing whatever.
Thank you guys so much. So I have a question. So going back to kind of the start of creating this book and creating other books that you guys have been involved with or written, what was it about the Black community in Wichita that inspired you guys to start doing research on that area, and what was the start of that like?
I'll jump in. Descent in Wichita is a study that I did as my PhD dissertation, and then rewrote as a book that would be accessible to people outside of academia. And I got involved with that for a couple of reasons. When I went to school, when I was in grad school the first time, the only people that you studied were white men who won wars or were political leaders. And it was the period of in the late 60s, early 70s, when we had students coming along and reading that material and saying, wait a minute, there are a lot of people who are missing from this story. Where are women of all ethnicities? Where are Native Americans, or Indigenous Americans? Where are African Americans, Asian Americans, Mexican Americans, et cetera, et cetera? Aren't they all part of America's history as well? Would this be better if I took this off?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear? You hear okay?
Yeah.
So I was part of that first group, first generation who'd come of age during the Civil Rights Movement, and had begun to ask the questions, where is the rest of the history? So when I moved to Wichita and began teaching, and I moved to Kansas and got my PhD at KU, I had an opportunity to either study Wichita, 20 years of Wichita history in the civil rights years, or my professor said, or you could do 5 cities and do like 5 cities that had early sit-ins. And I was teaching full time, and sometimes 5 or 6 classes a semester while I was doing my dissertation. And I thought, I can't be driving, I have to make a relationship with people in 5 or 6 cities. I can't do that. So I didn't know much about Wichita. I had just moved here. And in a way that gave me an opportunity, because I could ask the questions that maybe if I'd grown up here, I would have thought I had the answers to, maybe, or, and I was in the church community, and through the pastor at St. Paul's AME, I met a number of people in the community who he said, it's really important that you talk with her. And I did a history of the church, first of all, and then he began saying, you know, you can trust her. You can actually trust her, which is hard. Which is something that people have good reason to be suspicious. And so that's how I got involved.
Thank you. Dr. Price?
Much easier with this. Thank you. I've long been fascinated with the stories that are hidden in plain sight. There's something for me intriguing about parts of a population, parts of a community that folks know about, but really don't have a good understanding, certainly in the broader community, and a lot of times even the population itself doesn't have a good sense of how it developed. And a lot of times they're just little high points. Well, what happens in between those high points? And for me, that was the fascinating part of this. In remembering Dr. Ike's work, when I first moved here in 1999, I was trying to figure, well, okay, I got a position at Wichita State University. What's going on in Wichita? I needed to look a little bit more on that. One of the first things I came across was information about the Dockham sit-in, and it referenced her book. And so in a lot of ways, your work was some of the first material that helped me understand what Wichita was. And so it got me to thinking, well, what else is going on here? And one of the nice things about Dissent in Wichita is that it starts with the sit-in. But it's not just the sit-in. There's such a larger context. In a lot of ways, that's where the most powerful story comes in.
The question, the question was just, what was it that helped you to start the research or encouraged you to start researching?
Well, I remember when I first came to work here, time after time I was flabbergasted about the things that I learned and upset that I had never been taught in school. And so the Kansas African American Museum and projects like this are really needed for people to understand that African American history is American history, and it's very important. The work that I did on the book, I did a little bit of writing, but mostly it was digging up photographs and just working with the other members of the committee. But I really enjoyed the time that I've had here. It's just been so enlightening, and I have a much better appreciation for history. I know when I was younger, I didn't care about history, but as you get older, you start to understand a lot more, and it becomes very important to you. I really enjoyed that aspect of the job and of this project.
Could I just jump in there?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think one of the things that made this team a really rich team was we had Dr. Weems, who was a business historian. We had me, who I was a civil rights historian. We had Jay, who was a local history historian. We're asking different questions. Carol is really very, very knowledgeable about popular culture. We had Mark McCormick, who knew the community backward and forward, and he knew so many people that really we should be including. And that was one of the challenges of this book, is that we had a limited amount of letters that we could put under each photograph. And so trying to narrow it down so that we could tell the story effectively, and know that we're missing, that we're missing a lot of people, and hoping that they will forgive us, because we had to sort of literally almost like dealing out cards, saying, okay, there's this, this, and this. If we can only do two, which do we do?
I see, and that's very interesting to me, because that's the same way creating an exhibition goes. Mm-hmm. And especially with this exhibition, Carol would come and help me. And we were kind of downstairs looking through our stuff and saying, okay, well, go through the list. You have like 80 pictures. You've got to pick the ones that are most representative, or that you feel kind of give the best feel for the time and the story that you would like to tell. And I think that as kind of curators, both of stories in book form and in exhibition form, that's one of the greatest things that becomes a challenge. And so with that, I wonder, just because I know that I'm younger and even learning about this stuff, like you said, one of the most interesting things I find is that people that come into Wichita end up learning more or digging deeper into our history than we do. And so I know for myself, kind of like what Carol said, when I was younger, I was not worried about history. I knew who my family was, but I didn't understand to what degree they were rooted in the community. And so coming and working here has been one of the main reasons I've dug into and learned so much about where I'm from. Um, and so I wonder if from the information that you guys gathered, is there kind of like almost like a manuscript of all of the information you gathered? Or do you feel like the book African Americans of Wichita and Descent in Wichita kind of paint the best and broadest picture of that story? I know that's a weird question, but
Books like The Arcade of a Conversation, and I usually talk about these as a starting point. I loved how you talked about the same thought process with exhibit, and exactly right. This, in a lot of ways, is an exhibit on paper. It has the same sort of conversation with the same sorts of strengths and weaknesses. So this has the capacity to really talk about some wonderful visual images. What about aspects of our community that aren't photographed? Because there are a lot of aspects, because photography itself privileges certain voices and not others. Certain individuals, certain activities get photographed, certain people, activities, places do not. We know what front parlors look like. We don't know what kitchens look like. It's that type of our conversation. So there's already a limit to what we're seeing because not everything that's out there has been photographed. So that's a challenge. The brevity of these statements, you're having to talk about very complicated ideas in 55 words. Whereas in a narrative book like Descent in Wichita, you can explain and expound on that. Here we were limited to the visual medium. And so the portions of the story that are visual could be presented here. So it's really a starting point. As to where the manuscript is, I'm not sure there is the manuscript. There are manuscripts, and a key one is here. A key one are the manuscripts of the people sitting in the room here. There are manuscripts, just not a manuscript.
There is so much opportunity to collect this history way beyond what is in this book. There are so many people who we mention in this book about whom a book or several books could be written and researched. And my hope is that this is, like Jay said, a starting point, that your grad students, that other people's students, that individuals who just have an interest will pick up these stories. Because, I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was thinking about the role of images. I read the book again this week and was just startled by how good it is. I mean, I really feel like I hadn't read it for like 5 years. And I thought, I think it's a really good depiction because it includes the breadth of people's experience. It includes popular culture, and it includes the new African community that has come into Wichita and strengthened Wichita's Black community. Includes just the early history, et cetera. But I read it and I was thinking about the power of the images photographed this summer with George Floyd. And everybody in the world knows that image, knows that horrific image. And I don't think I can't imagine anybody who hasn't been impacted by that. And when you think about the early part of this history, like the cover, they're like Jay's saying, the images we have from that early time are not necessarily, we don't have that many of them, and we have to find them. And we have to tell our family members that when someone dies, don't throw things out. go to the Kansas, well, you could say ABLA Library, but I send people to KU's Spencer Library Collection because they have a very fine African-American collection. And if you, instead of throwing things out, you just drive things up to KU and you donate them, and they become something that scholars in 50 years from now will still be using.
Maybe to follow up on that, and you're exactly right, Gretchen, that preservation is so important. Price's law of history is that history is not written by the winners, it's written by the survivors. What survives is what we remember. And a lot of times that might be the winners of the story. A lot of times, though, the winners are too busy winning to actually preserve anything. And sometimes it's the side stories that get preserved. And so there's also a question of how representative is a collection. So you might have a collection that is wonderful and rich and detailed, but is one small segment, whereas this significant story over here never got photographed for whatever reason. And so kind of trying to build in those gaps is something we're always hoping people can do.
So to switch gears a little bit, I know one thing that myself and Dr. Reeves and Ms. Brooke have found that throughout the museum, and especially in our permanent collection, we have like favorite stories or favorite images. And so from your research or from your time kind of assembling this book, for each of you, what's one of your favorite images or favorite stories from that time period, or one that just always kind of stuck out for you?
One of the things that I would mention, I'm not sure this would qualify as my favorite, because I don't think I could do a favorite. There's so many good, wonderful, powerful images. But as we work together as a team, hearing Mark McCormick talk about the fire, the plane that went down on North Piatt Street, and there's an image in this book of the blocks and blocks and blocks that were burned to the ground. And then hearing Mark talk about that and thinking, that's a huge event. Your mother got worked to get a very fine memorial to that. But that's the kind of thing that affects so many people's lives profoundly. And it is also in a way, a story of racism in Wichita. Where would they bring that plane down? Well, they bring it down in Northeast. And so that's one image.
The image that comes to mind right now is the image of Dr. Perry and his car and that house. And there was such a pride of, we have arrived. I mean, I love that. Yes, that was a contender for the cover. It really was. It was one of, and there was just such a pride and a confidence that's wonderful about it. The other thing that I really found fascinating in doing the research was how many veterinarians we had in the African American community. And my dad's a veterinarian, so I mean, I picked up on this right away. So it's like, why are there so many vets? And actually, I found out there's a whole story with that, because in a time when people of color weren't always welcome into medical school, if you had a medical interest, you were allowed into vet schools. And so there is a story of African American veterinarians that is amazing to tell in its own right.
I actually have a couple of them. One of them is in learning about the Van Loo family, because I was just blown away about the fact that Mr. Henry Van Loo was a real estate man. He was not only a businessman, he was probably the richest landowner or real estate owner in Wichita at the time. And when you think about the times that they lived and the accomplishments that they made, it's not startling. It's awe-inspiring. The other one is the building of this church, because I know when at the time they built the church, they had to tear it down and rebuild it. They ended up paying $75,000 for the church, and when they burned the mortgage, you stop and think of what amount of money that would be in today's world, and how they came about that was everybody pitching in, and they would have bake sales and garage sales, and all kinds of hard work went into raising that money. But to me, that's
that's pretty amazing.
Carol, maybe you put your mic even closer just to be sure you can be heard because you're telling such important
Okay.
stories. There's also a set of pictures in here that shows the police department, the fire department, in the era before 1910, when segregation laws began to be passed all across this country. There was a very prosperous Black community that stretched along here. And there were people, if you get a chance to look at this book, the photographs are really delightful, showing the prosperity and the number of people who had businesses, the fire trucks, the shopkeepers, et cetera. I mean, it's just to see what happened and then how that was rolled back. We're in a time of rollback right now, and it behooves all of us to be vigilant and to do everything we can to prevent that to turn it back again.
I agree. And I think what I'll do after this talk, the 3 or 4 or 5 pictures that you guys stated, I'll go ahead and post those on our Facebook so that listeners or people who missed out can see what pictures really inspired you guys and inspired your research quite a bit. And also, let's see, I know one of the greatest things that has happened for me in doing research and putting together exhibitions on Black Wichita is learning about more than where we come from here in the city, but that we have often and always established a place for ourselves. And I know that has kind of been fleeting. It started here in the middle of the city, moved out to the northeast, and then moved a little bit further to the north and different places where we reside. And I guess I know that you guys moved here a little bit after this time period. So I guess I might direct this question at Ms. Carol, maybe. Do you personally remember any of the events in the time periods throughout this?
I was a
exhibition?
latecomer to Wichita. I didn't move here till almost 1970. So,
Yeah.
not much help.
But the book goes all the way up through the 90s
Yes.
and the early 2000s.
Yes,
I mean,
the book
we have
itself-
some of our young people who were activists featured at the end of the book,
Yes.
which I pushed really hard to do because I think it's really important.
Yes, no, I agree. And actually, on that point, I'm kind of going on the fly here, but I wonder if you had to add to the book a little bit about current times, what would be an important piece that you might add to the book from more of our period? I think that the book ends in, I want to say, the early to mid 2000s. So from maybe like the 2010s, what's something I add to that book? And I'll kind of go. I know one of the a great thing for me that I would love to add, and this might be taking one of yours, but definitely the Horizontes project. I think that that's such a beautiful bridge between the north end and the northeast part of Wichita, and also the stories that are woven into that mural and the project and the information that was collected there. I think it's such a beautiful tidbit to add to our story and to add to the landmarks that live in the northeast part of Wichita.
Building on that, and also on your previous comment, that Horizontes project was bringing together people from these different neighborhoods and resulted in the wonderful murals on the grain elevators. But one of the things that I saw when I looked at the research from that project was how many people who were interviewed said, "We love our neighborhood. We love living where we live. It's not that we have to live here. It's that we have family, we have roots that go back." And that was sort of a surprise to me, but it was also a really good surprise. But I also thought, and it's connected to what you said earlier when you said the community has so much life and so it keeps reinventing itself, keeps finding ways to be active. And I have said to my family, um, this is going to sound strange, but I've said, I think I'm a wannabe Black person because I have such admiration for the numbers, the ways in which people have, like the links and the, I mean, I'm just going to name that. There's so many groups, the fraternities and the sororities, but those are middle class. But it's not only middle class, the churches, the ways in which people keep hope alive by having social connections and the griots, I mean, what a wonderful group. There's so much of that going on in our community, and it is essential to keeping people going.
I think from in more recent years, there'd be highs and lows, certainly. On the high point, we could certainly talk about the new generation of entrepreneurs. I mean, I'm probably speaking for Dr. Weems on this, but there's some really creative new entrepreneurial ventures that are going on now. In fact, Dr. Weems and I are working with his colleague Sue Abdunor, looking right now at ethnic entrepreneurship in Wichita and kind of comparing the stories between African American entrepreneurs, Latino entrepreneurs, and Asian entrepreneurs. And there's some marked differences actually in how the communities function. So it's kind of fun to look at that. I think also looking at how the African American community has continued to make its presence known in other parts of the city, that it's not just a Northeast story, but it's really a city-wide story. I think that's certainly something we can think about. I'd love to do a lot more with the immigrant populations who've been coming in, and some of the soccer teams and things like that. I think that'd be fun. On the other side, certainly we're going to need to look at the Black Lives Matter movement. We're going to need to look at activism and the tragedy at Fairmount Park that really developed right as this book was being worked on. And I think it's also sparked a rethinking about what the North End looks like around the university, with good intentions and things still to work on. And so I think those would be some things I'd want to develop.
Don't have a lot to add to that. They've covered it.
Okay. Well, I know we have a limited crowd out here, but I was wondering if we want to open it up for questioning from anybody here in our audience. If anybody has questions or comments or anything that they remember even about this time period from the this might be before people's time, but from the 1930s until the
1968, 1868, really, and on.
Oh,
The book
yeah.
begins, in 1868.
Yes, yes. But if we have anybody that remembers anything from, the greater time period of Black Wichita, if you'd like to share, that would be great.
I have a question. Actually, I have a question for the audience, if I may.
Yeah.
One of the things that's fascinating about this story, and we're talking about this as the interwar years from the 19-teens through World War II, and the shift from the Water Street area as kind of the hub of the business community to a movement out to the Cleveland and McAdams neighborhood by the 30s. From family memories, what was the impetus for that? Because I hear different stories about why people moved from down here out to the 9th and Cleveland, the McAdams area. What have you heard in your stories?
One of the things that I heard was the reason why the African American community was between Elm and Pine was the reunification, reordering Wichita, which took the land that was owned by blacks and then pushed them north and east. That's what I have heard.
And I definitely was not around at that time, but I think from my reading and kind of compiling for this exhibition, one thing that I know happened, like Dr. Ike was saying, that at the beginning of the 1910s and a little bit before that, there were so many segregation laws put in place. And especially here in Wichita, I think what happened was that Black people weren't allowed to work in certain places. And in the Northeast area, there were a lot more job opportunities that may not have been the best, but they were available. And so they moved into that area because there were jobs there. They were able to live in those places or build homes in that area. And so that kind of pushed them from this area, along with urban renewal, which is a thing, and kind of the eminent domain in this area that kind of pushed them to that area, is my understanding. But
Yeah, the point of jobs along the railroad corridor makes a whole lot of sense. One of the things I'm finding with context with the Somas to Wichita project is that we think of the North End as primarily Latino region today, but it wasn't that in the 19 teens. It was just a working class area and doesn't really become primarily Hispanic Latino until really around World War II and a little after. It's actually a much later period than we realize. And so I could see that really coming in. The other question, I'm going to totally take advantage of this opportunity, and I was looking at the schools. There's Frederick Douglass and Louverture. Wichita being Wichita, Wichita loves its school rivalries. Was there a rivalry between Frederick Douglass and Louverture?
that's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't suspect that there was, just because if I believe right, I know that Frederick Douglass was the first school and it was over here, and it was a wider variety of students, where Louverture, I think after a while, kind of just turned into K through 5. And so it was a little bit different, but I am not completely sure. I do have a question though. So, I'm
Yeah, I
sorry.
just wanted to pick up
Yeah.
just one thing on the move. I think the move of people from Waco to Maine, that was the 15-block area that was kind of the center of the Black community for a long time. I think that move, what's happening today could maybe help us understand a little bit more. This morning I got a call. I now live in Midtown, and I got a call on my phone saying, it was a robocall saying, if you're interested in selling your house, we'll give you cash. And this is the beginnings this is a pretty bad economic time for people. And the 30s were a very bad economic time for people. So when you have people taking an opportunity to move you, and the move was to the Cleveland area, and I remember Dr. Veazey talking about overlooking what is today the canal, and then this flooding that happened, and people being forced, to figure out where to go because the flooding is coming up. The water is just rising, and it's terrible. So the move was a staggered move, and the move was led in some respects by the churches in the early 50s, who moved into what is today what we call Northeast Wichita, and that kicked off a frenzy of real estate people trying to make a lot of money by playing on white fear and saying, a Black church just moved into your neighborhood, a Black family just moved into your neighborhood, your home values are going to go down. We know that when we look at the data, that's not true, but we know that the fear drives people to then flee and put their houses on the market. And of course, the more houses that turned over, the more money the real estate agents made. So it was a staggered move, and then Northeast just kind of became kind of a settled community that a lot of people were happy in. I was thinking of another thing we haven't really done with this book, I think, and what would be important in a follow-up, and that would be to look at the military, because a lot of people today come to Wichita, even in the 50s, in the 40s, were coming to Wichita because of McConnell, and many people decided to stay. So what's that story? And there are tons of people for whom that's their life reality that brought them here. Others came from Oklahoma, and the freedmen, Cherokee freedmen and other freedmen's groups are represented here. We didn't really get into that as well.
There was a question from online by Sherry Skillman. She wanted to know, does anyone here know about the XYZ Club, women who worked for racial equality?
XYZ. There was the CCSA, which was a spinoff of the YWCA, which was women of all races and religions working together, and they were incredible. They were in the 50s, and Annabelle Haupt and oh gosh, there's a picture here. Um, they went to restaurants and demanded to be, they would go into restaurants like a white woman would go into a restaurant, a black woman would go into a restaurant, and the white woman would watch and see, would the black woman be waited on? And if she wouldn't be waited on, they would say, we want to talk to the manager, we want to see what's going on here. I mean, they were very, very coordinated, very well organized. Later, they actually formed what they called the Panel of American Women, and they flew on small planes or drove into rural Kansas, white, black, often Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, to make presentations about what it's like to live in my skin into these rural communities in Kansas that maybe had very little diversity. And I mean, this was really, really an important movement, but I don't know, I've never heard of XYZ, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've heard of the Double V campaign in the 40s, of course, and I remember talking with Bessie Halbrook on the Double V campaign, but that's perhaps a bit earlier than what we're talking about here.
The people who were involved were in the CCSA were Annabelle Michener, who was the organizer of it, Mary Jane Michener, I think I got her name wrong. Annabelle Haupt, Esther Brown from Kansas City, and Anita Burney was the leader here.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions from Facebook Live?
I don't see any right now. Thank you.
Okay.
I think the other thing is just to say, if we've stimulated something in your, as you watch this, or if you're on Facebook now, and if you thought, oh, my grandmother or my grandfather did such and such, or our family came here because of the Air Force and stayed, don't let that thought go away. The museum is a great place to bring those thoughts, to bring your history, to write it out yourself as much as you can, because, we die, we all die. And so if we don't get this stuff written down before our time is up, it's not going to get remembered. To leave you on a happy note.
I'd like to add to that. That's exactly what we need to do, is to get everyone to bring their history. The Kansas African American Museum is a really good source. And you were talking about manuscripts earlier. What we have in the archives here, there is a wonderful study done by John Gaston when he got his PhD that has a lot of the information that we took for this book. I learned by reading his dissertation. That was a really good source. And there's several others that encourage people to come in. They can view things in the archives. They can do their own research. We just want to have a lot of interaction with the community and recommend it.
And I think I'll add a little bit to that. I know, so here in the gallery, we actually have a small little booth that says "Add to our story," and I put that in the exhibition because I think, especially from my experience and being from a younger generation, one thing that I have found so wonderful is to have generations above me that have been able to tell stories about experiences that they had and about different events from their perspective. And I think that part of the story is so necessary for us to tell the greater story here in museums, for us to tell those stories in talks like these. And so we definitely need for people to come and visit us and share with us the things that they know, because even though someone may feel like their story isn't necessarily as big or as grand as someone else's, it lends to the greater body of the story. And we definitely need that in order to tell our story in the most full and most colorful way possible.
I just want to add one more thing. One of the things that we talked about doing when I was working here was to get a really good visual picture about what this area looked like back in at the turn of the century, early 1900s. And there are people, there were houses, there were people who grew up here, and we know there's photographs out there. So, bring your photographs in. We would love to see that. Add that to the collection.
I'm sorry, Miss Jenny, can you come use the mic so that the people can hear you, please?
My grandmother and grandfather lived on 924 Water, where the train went down the middle of the street. Well, when they moved from over there, they moved over to the 1400 block on Madison. There were no other Black people over there. And so all the neighbors were white, and they eventually, they moved, after a while. And their son, I have an uncle, Dr. Eugene Adams, who was a veterinarian, who moved from here. Because after he went in the service, even though he had a college education, they wanted him to be a cook. And after he came back, he could not find a job. He went to Kansas City, and he was a meat inspector before he went to Tuskegee. He was in Tuskegee Institute for Professor Emeritus, was there for many, many years. Wow. But he started out, my folks moved here from Oklahoma, Guthrie, and, he came up through the system here. But he could not, he was friends with Dr. McDonald, that was a veterinarian, and you said the other one, was it Perry?
Curry.
Dr. Perry was friends with him.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, with that, I will open it up for closing remarks from any of you, and then I can close it out after that.
No, just do preserve this history, and get it to the museum. And if it's a huge volume of letters that the museum may not be able to handle, letters and correspondence, you can take it to the African American collection at KU Spencer Research Library.
The key thing is definitely to share stories. I think perhaps as much as collecting and sharing to a repository like this institution, like KU, like Wichita State, telling each other the stories is important. Do your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, nieces and nephews, do they know your family story? Make sure as the holidays come up that you're telling them the stories. Tell them why the family came to Wichita, what became of them. Tell them what the family traditions are. Teach them the family recipes, because they're the ones who are going to carry it to the future.
Yes, good book. Enjoyed it very much. I learned so much. Thank you.
Well, one other thing, just quick thing to put in, is the homesteading. There were Black homesteaders, and I was talking to someone who goes into the schools and does a program on homesteading. And I said to her, do you include Black homesteaders? What are you talking about? Well, there were Black homesteaders. And if you're going into the schools, and if you're doing a program on homesteading in Kansas, you need to include Black homesteaders. And this book does have a few pictures. The Kansas State Historical Society has some photographs. There's so much available, so many images available online that you can really do a great presentation. Oscar Michaud, who's the filmmaker, very famous filmmaker in the silent era, who's buried in Great Bend, he was a homesteader, and he wrote a novel and a a kind of a biography of his experience called The Homesteader. This is great. I mean, our kids, you're not interested in history if the history doesn't look like you. If the history looks like you, it makes it a whole lot more interesting.
One of the other things, just real quick, I have a student right now working on the history, looking at documenting African American cemeteries across Kansas. And there are an awful lot of little cemeteries that are vestiges or holdovers from those communities or those populations. Sometimes it was a whole town, sometimes it was just a cluster of families. And we're just now trying to document some of that as well, another hidden in plain sight.
And I just want to say one more thing that I forgot is to let everybody know that we really appreciated all the efforts in helping us with photographs, because that was the one thing that we couldn't have done the book without, and the community was very helpful.
And that was another fun part, because we got to get into people's homes and look at the photographs that they had collected, which is really neat.
It makes me laugh because I know that for sure a couple of the pictures from the end of the book my mom supplied, and she's like the picture lady. She has all the pictures. So I know that a lot of the people that shared had a wonderful time being able to share that with you guys for the book too. So yes. Yes, so I will close it out. Thank you guys so much for coming and sharing with us today. We really, really appreciate it. And we appreciate how much you've lent to compiling and putting together a lot of our history. And like you were saying, Dr. Ike, I think one of the most beautiful things about it is that this book here and this exhibition and our history lets younger people like me know, and also people from throughout different generations here in the Black community in Wichita know that we've been here since the beginning, and our place is definitely rooted in the prosperity and the history of the city of Wichita. And hopefully that information helps to inform and encourage other Black people here to understand that there is a place for us, and that we can continue to build, and we can continue to root ourselves and create such a beautiful place like we have in the history, and we can do that beyond. And so I just want to thank you guys so much for all of your contributions, for your beautiful words, and for being here today with us here at the Kansas African American Museum.
And
Yes,
come to the
thank
museum
you.
and see the
Yes.
exhibit.
Absolutely.
I would also, before we end, I would like to remind you all that on November 14th, that is our Trailblazers Gala. It looks a little different. It's Trailblazers. Denise? Okay. It's going to be televised on the CW at 7 p.m., and that's channel 33 on Cox Cable, channel 5 on Antenna, and then it will be replayed again on the same night, November 14th at 10:30 p.m. on KWCH channel 12. We are honoring Janetta Everett, Carla Eccles, Sam Ford, and posthumously Hattie McDaniel. So and Dr. Charlotte Smith is our Rising Star honoree this year. And that's named after Doris Kerr Larkin, Rising Star. So please tune in. There are ways that you can get engaged if you go on our website. We have several packages that you can purchase to help this fundraiser and this event go forward. So we want to thank you all and hope that we see you on our live feed on November 14th for our Trailblazer Hall of Fame celebration at 7 p.m.
November 14th.
14th.
November 14th.
Yes. Thank you guys.